This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, the podcast about Red Dwarf, here on the We Made This Podcast Network. And that is what this episode is about, the We Made This Podcast Network. The We Made This Podcast Network is 5 years old this January. So all the network's podcasts are celebrating by doing weird and wonderful crossovers. Later this month, we've got some great, fun things planned for you. But what we thought we'd do is we'd post something from my other podcast, ChuckyVision, that featured hosts from Shipwrecked and Comatose. Because, you know, it's kind of a crossover, sort of. We did these things because I basically wanted to podcast with Matt and Kurt a little bit more. And they were about episodes of TV series that we like that feature dolls. You know, because Chucky is a doll. Not much crossover here, really, other than the hosts, but we thought that you'd like them as a curiosity anyway. And if you like Buffy, Angel, or The X-Files, then maybe these are fun little extras for you. We're posting these on a daily basis for the next 3 days. This is the first one. Matt joins me for a chat about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Hello and welcome to ChuckyVision, the podcast about Chucky, Child's Play, and anything to do with that particular horror franchise here on the We Made This Podcast Network. My name is Mark Adams and I am your host for this special episode in between Series 2 and 3 of the television series Chucky. And with me at this time, as always, well, almost as always, is my co-host Dev. Hello, Dev.
Hello. Are you going to hang that over me now from here on out? Almost always.
Yes, you hate Heartstopper, which means you hate love.
Oh.
But it's not just Dev and myself today. We are doing the first of a two-part series over 2 weeks in a kind of, we're sad that Series 3 of Chucky isn't happening yet because of the strike, but we fully support the strike because fuck people who don't pay people properly. That was a long introduction. Hello, Matt Latham.
Hello.
So we've got Matt from Shipwrecked and Comatose and Pick a Disc to join us because he loves Chucky. Oh, wait, he doesn't love Chucky. No, what we're doing is we're doing 2 episodes of other teleseries. First up is Buffy with Matt, and next week is X-Files with Kurt. They both happen to be my co-hosts on Shipwrecked and Comatose, but they both like a particular thing that is relevant for this, so we thought we'd invite them on. Matt, have you genuinely never seen a Chucky film?
No.
Fuck's sake, mate.
The closest I think I've ever gotten to anything Chucky-like is one, the episode we're talking about, and Slappy from the Goosebumps books.
Now, I know Dev likes Slappy, and you're kind of in between our ages. I didn't really encounter Slappy. I knew who he was because he was like the kind of icon of Goosebumps. Well, why is it that? Is it just that you're not into horror, or did you just not? Are you scared of dolls? Is there a reason why you've not seen any Child's Play?
I'm not particularly a fan of horror as a genre in general, or horror films or anything. I'm just the closest kind of franchise I've watched that I've liked or can stomach watching is Scream, but that's mainly because it's more meta and kind of exploration of the genre rather than being a genre.
Don't you miss out on some of the references, though, if you watch Scream and you haven't seen all the horror films?
That's what TV tropes is for.
But I suppose another exception is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I know you're a huge fan of. And at one point, you and I were talking about doing a Buffy podcast. What is it about Buffy that kind of bucks the trend of you not being a big horror guy?
I think TV horror is a lot different to kind of movie horror, particularly, well, this being a network TV show, it's not essentially going to be downright jump scare scary. And that's probably the main thing that I'm particularly wary of. I'm not a fan of jump scares. I'm particularly really kind of fucking hate jump scares and stuff, to the point that I have played video games like Until Dawn and Silent Hill 2. Before I bought them, I specifically went onto YouTube and YouTubed the jump scares on mute to make sure that I knew where they were coming so I could play them. That's my main thing with the horror genre, is that I'm not a fan of jump scares, or particularly kind of psychologically being unsettled either. I'd rather feel entertained than unnerved. So
Jaws would be more scary than Saw for you, I suppose.
I would not watch Saw. I'm not a fan of torture porn.
Okay.
Kind of stuff, yeah. So overly grotesque kind of gore, I'm not a fan of either. So
family-friendly horror is what you like?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Basically stuff that would be on 8 p.m. on an American broadcast network with their very, very strict broadcasting standards.
And teenagers that are in their 30s.
None of them were in the 30s at this point. The closest was Charisma Carpenter. She was 29.
Fucking 29 playing someone 16.
Sarah Michelle Gellar was 19.
Yeah, I know Sarah Michelle Gellar was vaguely the right age, but looked so much older. But it's always been a bugbear of mine. It's the one thing I don't like about Buffy, other than what we found out about Joss Whedon, is that they all look like just adults. Like, even Sarah Michelle Gellar, who is still technically a teenager, she was a woman, and it really annoys me.
Thing is that there's a massive kind of in between season 1 and 2. She kind of visibly ages. So when she goes, so like she's got a very kind of almost like just post kind of teenage look in season 1, but then season 2, it's only a few months, but she looks like she ages a few years in between.
But yeah, so what we're doing is we're looking at an episode of Buffy that features a dummy. And that episode was Series 1, Episode 9. It was broadcast in May 1997, which puts it pre-Bride of Chucky. At this point, we've only seen Child's Play 2, and Child's Play 3. And the episode is called The Puppet Show. Dev, are you a big fan of Buffy?
Yes, I've binged all of the show during uni, so that would have been a good 10 years ago. I think I caught it just before the Whedon stuff came out, so I managed to watch it unscathed. I finished Buffy, gave it a little pause before I was going to get into Angel, and then all the stuff started coming out, so I never actually got round to Angel. I actually just bought Angel on DVD, so I'm finally going to get round to that show. But
slight deviation is that I think at a certain point, I remember because I was watching it from start to finish, and when we finally got on Sky, it came to the point where I preferred Angel, mainly because it felt like Buffy was the opening match to the main event that was Angel, because of the way it was scheduled.
I preferred Angel as well. I think it just suited me a little bit better. It was aimed at a slightly older audience, and I kind of liked the concept of vampire detective. I thought that was quite fun. Matt, did you ever do a watch where you started at Buffy Series 1, got all the way to Buffy Series 4, and then watched Buffy and Angel simultaneously because they were supposed to be in the same timeline?
I've never fully been able to do that. I've got the Buffy and Angel DVDs. I've never actually watched the Angel DVDs all the way through, actually, because I've always meant to go and watch them all the way to back. And I've never done that because I know I've never rewatched season 5 of Angel. Not over any kind of personal choice of me disliking it. I've just never got around to kind of doing a full rewatch of Angel from front to back since it finished.
Now, I've just remembered there's a puppet episode of Angel.
There is.
I'd forgotten that.
Smile time.
Maybe we could do a third one of these. Matt, do you want to come back and talk about Smile Time?
Yeah, because I've never rewatched it, actually. I've only watched it on the broadcast.
Right, maybe not. Maybe we'll do like a sequel. We'll definitely do Buffy and X-Files. But if we do Angel as well. We'll chuck that in at some point when we've got time to do it. I'd completely forgotten until we started talking about Series 5 of Angel. There is a puppet episode, and it's fucking great as well.
It's much, much better than the puppet shows.
Oh, what? Right. Okay. Let's talk about the puppet show. You didn't think much of it because I thought it was one of the stronger episodes of Series 1 of Buffy.
I think just before we start recording, this is kind of like the episode of the Buffy podcast we never got to make. So I'm kind of going into it with that, mainly because of my kind of like complete ignorance of Chucky in general. But yeah, season 1 of Buffy is kind of like a kind of unique outlier in terms of how it was kind of structured, written, and kind of produced as like its own entity before it even aired. So it's a very closed off, almost unique kind of tone and style and kind of production history. And you know, it bothers me no end when people always put it near the bottom of their lists in terms of like their favorite season, because it might be kind of like nostalgic, kind of biased, kind of emotional love for that season, but I've always kind of had a nice soft spot for it. And there's none episodes in it I really dislike, but it's only kind of rewatching it about an hour ago that a couple of things have occurred to me about this, even though I've rewatched, even though technically I could have come here without rewatching it because I know the episode that well. in terms of Buffy season 1, it's serialized because it's one of the first shows I think that kind of did the kind of strict serialization in that if you kind of missed episodes, you'd lose something. And
the overarching plot thing.
Yeah. And that's not that apparent in season 1, but I think season 1 is still very kind of tightly, you must watch them in an order than people I think give it credit for. I was thinking about it and thinking, oh, well, yeah, you can't get away with skipping episodes of it. And I was trying to think about each episode, and I almost said that there's only one episode you could skip, which was Teacher's Pet, which is episode 4 with the praying mantis. But there are things in that, like I think it's like the first reappearance of Angel as a character.
You could skip this one. I hadn't thought about it, but you could, couldn't you? There's no references to the Master, the big bad.
Yeah, This is my point, because this is the only episode of the season I can think of that doesn't match any kind of teenage metaphor or it being about something in comparison to other episodes. So you've got even Teacher's Pet, which is about a giant praying mantis, is still about kind of teenage crushes on teachers. The witch is about kind of pressure, like the overbearing parents, but what also introduces the idea of witchcraft in there. Never Kill a Boy in the First Day is about basically trying to juggle dating as a teenager with extra responsibilities. The Pack is about kind of friends going a bit naughty and turning into bullies.
Teacher's Pet and the Pack aren't very good, Matt.
They are, but still, but my point being is that they still have at least a hook that links into a kind of teenage problem. And then you got I, Robert, You, Jane, which is a really dated yet enjoyable episode on catfishing. You got Nightmares, which is more of a personal one. You've got about Nightmares, which is about fears or what to do with the characters. Out of Mind, Out of Sight is about feeling lonely and being ostracised. And you got Prophecy Girl, which is like one of the best episodes of TV ever made.
It is.
But this one doesn't. I can't think of any kind of metaphor which would relate to the teenage experience to this, apart from what being forced to do a talent show. It doesn't feel as strong or as a key component to the episode as like other kind of teenage things.
I think you're right that it doesn't fit the pattern. You're absolutely right. But I don't think I care because it's one of the strongest episodes of season 1.
And it's entertaining, but I don't think you can skip this episode because the only arc thing that happens in this is that it's the first episode that has Principal Snyder in it.
Okay. And he's incredibly important.
Yeah. And I'm about I've not rewatched it in at least over a decade now. And I know for a fact that as I'm older and perhaps closer to the age of Giles and the adult characters than I am the teenagers.
Me too, mate.
I was younger than the teenage characters when it first came out. But I've got a feeling that I know I'm going to be a lot more sympathetic towards Snyder as a character as I'm older. and I was watching this and it was already happening. And I think my appreciation of Snyder as a character has increased. But in terms of the actual kind of important relevance in the whole show, it's very throwaway, and I think it's one of the weaker episodes in terms of its construction of what the show's main raison d'etre is, to try and use supernatural as a metaphor for teenage life and growing up and all the kind of different things that people deal with. I till this day cannot tell you what the second layer of storytelling that this is.
I don't think it has one. I think it's just a monster of the week. And it's interesting that you say that, because Buffy is kind of the gentle thing that people seem to think about Buffy is it's this overarching plot with a monster of the week. But they've missed the nuance that you've just talked about as an example of a monster of a week that just fits almost as a filler episode, because like I said, there's no master stuff. It's a monster of the week with characters that we've established and we like. As that, it's exceptional. But I do agree with what you're saying, that it is missing the metaphor for teenage life. It is missing an important part of the overarching plot. But I don't care, there's a dummy.
Even when he's kind of creeping and perving on a 16-year-old girl.
We'll get to that.
I'm going to say I'm surprised you haven't gone 90s ick yet. So.
It's definitely 90s ick, but we'll get to that. What did you think of it in general, Dev? How did you feel it fitted in your kind of Buffy fandom watchery?
I agree with quite a few points that Matt made. I think season 1, I really do have a strong nostalgia for season 1. I think it is essential, not just in the show, but like just in TV at the time. Like, because it did, I love X-Files, but the as we talked about the arcing story of the big bad, the master in X-Files, that shit is all over the place.
Yes,
that shit never makes any sense. But in this, it's so much more cohesive, and it is in those. It reminds me of like Supernatural. There's so many filler episodes of Supernatural that I would skip, but then they always throw in like a 2-minute scene at the end where there's a character drama moment where it's like, oh, you technically have to see that that develops the story, but the whole other episode is completely filler. And yeah, I agree with this one. This is probably one of the lightest episodes, and I think there's enjoyable elements. There's definitely enjoyable elements that I really like in this episode. But yeah, as you say, there's a mention I saw in the trivia of the them talking about when Buffy says dummies ick her out, and some of the other characters, like Willow, says she has like stage fright, and then Xander talks about how he doesn't like mimes, and then those do come into play like the very next episode in Nightmares. But then Nightmares is an episode that's actually doing something with that, whereas here there isn't that other layer. I think it's a good conceit, the talent show. That's a thing that all kids have to go through in high school, like either doing a talent show or laughing at the talent show. So I think there's a very relatable concept there, but then, yeah, they don't really do much with it. It's a very light, shallow episode.
I've got no problem with that. I don't really have a problem with Monster of the Week being a Monster of the Week if it's a cool Monster of the Week. And it was.
I think the other problem with it is that I think the actual Monster of the Week thing is pretty weak until we get to, we'll just go into spoilers, until we get into the twist that Sid is on the good side. I think up until then, it's pretty empty, really, in terms of the plot. Like, I kept thinking, like, Principal Snyder, I forgot how much he was in this episode as his first episode. Mm-hmm. But, like, he was in every other scene. And I didn't, maybe because it was the rewatch, I know where his character goes. But in this episode, it wasn't until the end where I was like, oh, we're meant to think he's the killer. Like, I didn't even think that. I was just like, why is he in this so much?
So, you say that, but then that never crossed my mind until that we're supposed to think that Snyder's the villain until, like, a moment where he's creeping around the back of the stage and about, like 80% of the episode in. The episode doesn't do anything at all to make you think that, or try and even hint that he's the killer or whatever, until perhaps he starts skulking around the back. And now I don't know whether that's because, again, they said that we know where he's going and what the importance of the character is, but I don't know. I don't even think the episode even attempts to make you think he's a red herring.
No, I thought so. I mean, just because he's just not a nice man. I think he's a quite obvious red herring, but I definitely think he's designed to be a red herring.
Yeah, I do think in the writing he is meant to be one, because he's always showing up in the half shadows where Buffy's investigating and stuff. I do think it's a good episode in establishing that he's going to be like a human obstacle for them. You can tell he's going to be a problem in the future. But then at the same time, I think I do think he's in it so much, more so because he's like a crutch for the writers. It's like they have this new character and he's kind of funny and he's in it so much. And like the actual investigating, there's the Scooby investigating. It's probably one of the most Scooby-like episodes of them actually investigating who the culprit might be. But then it's kind of clever that we do see the killer throughout the episode, but then learning who it is, the twist is just like, oh, it's that guy. It doesn't come together. It's just like, oh, it was that guy.
When you're mentioning about the kind of twist of the episode, I think, as you're talking now, I do think that perhaps one of the key things that the episode kind of does do, which the series straight at the bat tries to do, is take traditional tropes and spin them on their heads. So perhaps where the kind of focus may not be on the usual teenage kind of metaphor, what this one does do, I think, and perhaps focuses on, in spite of that, is its idea of taking well-worn tropes of horror and twisting it on its head. So, I mean, I think the two of you probably know this a lot more better than me. I mean, is there any kind of other examples in fiction of the kind of creepy dummy being actually the good guy? Or is this kind of another outlier in that regard?
Well, we looked at Magic recently where there was a moment where, is this dummy alive? And it wasn't, which we thought was quite fun because it was very different to Chucky. And similarly, I suppose you could argue that Glenn/Glenda is a good guy.
True, yeah, that's a good example.
In Seed of Chucky, but that was post this. And Glenn and Glenda became two different characters and then became the same character again. It's all that storyline is all about their non-binary identity in the end. But they were very, very conflicted and very traumatized by their identity and by their upbringing and became good. Whereas, again, I know you said that it was 90s ick. I like that this is a flawed good guy in Sid. I do like that. It wasn't very sensitively done. And going back to our Josh Whedon ick, I think it was handled poorly, but I don't actually have a problem with a flawed demon hunter who does do good things by killing off demons being creepy. I don't really have a problem with that because people are human and that is realistic. I just feel like the way it was handled and the way he wasn't called on it properly and how it was treated as normal to be a dirty old man wasn't well written, but the concept I actually quite liked.
I think as TV goes, it was like the shorthand of it.
Yeah.
He has been in that doll body for so long. Of course, he's horny. Like he's missing human interaction, and I think the writing is like there's enough there for the audience to go, oh well, yeah, I saw it see his side, or he's kind of gross. But yeah, I would have liked more. I think the first half of the episode maybe spends too long with the suspense of that payoff, because there's the bare minimum to get his character and to get the whole appeal of it. But I would have liked a bit more, maybe a bit more exploration with him, some more dialogue scenes.
I think that given another draft, I think what this episode could have done, which would separate it from other episodes, is perhaps he's capitalising more on Buffy seeing another kind of demon hunter, or at least kindred spirit. Because before I watched it, even though I had a strong memory of this episode, I thought that aspect was a bit more than it was. My memory of it was that there was a bit more of an exploration of that. So there's the scene where, because he's talking about knowing a Slayer in the 30s, in my head, I remember all the horny dummies and act thing in the 1930s Korean, but in my head I kind of constructed a more of a dialogue between those two characters about the duty they have and what it meant, and in my head I thought there was something a lot more there than there wasn't. But I think that there could have been a case of like Buffy either talking about why he did what he did and what she's got to do, and that probably could have made the episode a bit more of a standout in terms of what that's doing in comparison to what the rest of the season was doing.
Was Sid the first demon hunter that we encountered in Buffy? Because I want to say he is. I can't think of any other demon hunters or any other slayers prior to the puppet show.
I think, yeah, that's what I mean. I definitely agree with Matt there. I like that scene, and it works for the bare minimum of what this episode probably needed. But I think I definitely wanted more, because that's crazy that he used to know an earlier Slayer, and he has all this history, and then it doesn't really get explored. Although technically, that did kind of that was a weird setup. I don't think they even intended that for a setup. That did end up paying off way later when Spike does kill that Slayer in a later season in a flashback.
So Sid, I really thought that when I first saw it, that we'd see more of Sid. And we never did, with one exception, a video game that is it canon? Is it not canon? It's called Chaos Bleeds. It was an RPG and he was a playable character, and there was a very, very brief kind of bullshit plot on how he came back to life so you could play as him. And I don't know, would you have liked to have seen more Sid? I think that as a character, a lonely, pervy old man who's on the side of good but perhaps needs an education, I think that could have been fucking fascinating.
I don't know, I kind of like the idea of him kind of knowing that he has a purpose and that he knows that his purpose is coming to an end, so he has his place in the balance of good versus evil. Particularly when you, and again, going back to the idea of it having another stronger rewrite, particularly when you figure out where the season goes and when the season ends with one of the best episodes of TV ever made, Prophecy Girl, in terms of where that mortality is tested and the duty between living a life and having to do what's right. I think that the puppet show could have perhaps seeded that or raised those questions a lot more, so that when you have Prophecy Girl in a few episodes' time to end the season, those themes of what Sid's role and what eventually he does to pretty much to finish the demon and kind of go to his resting place and fulfill his role. I think that would probably help seed Prophecy Girl a lot more. I think when the eventual kind of idea of mortality and going to a death is brought up for Buffy in that later episode.
Yeah, this is perhaps a little bit flippant, but this is possibly more for you, Matt, than for Dev. Do you think there was an element of they didn't want to have the difficult puppet, the difficult prop, for want of a better phrase, along the lines of the Scutters in Red Dwarf, because they were incredibly problematic? Whereas, something like Child's Play has the budget and the time allocated to the difficultness of having a puppet, whereas I don't think a TV show would.
A comparison to, say, Chucky. It's hardly as animated as Chucky ever was.
No.
Yeah, it's a ventriloquist doll. His mouth goes up and down. That's it.
I don't know. I think it's a case of the show perhaps also being slightly aware of how cheesy the concept is in general anyway, and perhaps didn't want to delve down that well too often.
Was it cheesy at this point? We're talking 1997. We'd not had Bride of Chucky. We'd not had the satire. I think creepy dolls were a lot more creepy and a lot less ironic than they are now.
I think, as we pointed out, this episode is a turning point of that irony, where that is literally a joke when Buffy and Sid fight in the middle act, and then they both blame each other for the killing the person and taking out their heart. And then there's that moment where they pause and they're just like, What?
Yeah, that was very comic book fighty, wasn't it? You want the two good guys that sell the comics to fight and then get together and then fight the bad guy together. That's a really, really tropey thing, particularly in comic books, like, Superman versus Spider-Man or whatever. And that really stuck out as like, as much fun as it was, it just cheese. But the reveal, the twist was great. I don't know how they'd have got there otherwise, but I don't know. It just, maybe I've read too many comic books.
Yeah, everything after is great. But yeah, the most arbitrary build-up to that twist was the scene. Like, I like all of the investigation stuff. Them just, the main characters seeing the doll and going, ooh, that's weird. Him talking to his doll, that's kind of strange. But then when we, the audience, see that dialogue between Morgan and Sid, and it's deliberately so out of context, where Sid's like, she's the one, we gotta get her. And it's like, I don't know, it felt arbitrary to keep setting him up as the villain.
Also, I think as well, considering there's a whole scene where Sid is pretty much taken by Xander, and they're talking about finding the demon and stopping or at least thinking that Morgan's the demon or someone, there's a serial killer going out. You would have thought that Sid would have been listening.
Yeah, that scene does happen before Sid attacks Buffy, right? So yeah, wouldn't he be listening? Does he turn off at times?
Yeah, good point. But what I was going to say is the theft of Sid, when you think about it, it's really quite cruel and bullying by Xander, and it's not called out by any of the other characters.
Well, that's season 1 for you. And maybe Buffy as a whole, Xander's always kind of a dick and never really called out on.
You're not wrong. But no, stuff like that, I would have never spotted as I was watching it the first time around. And I think maybe, again, I'm gently more sensitive to unpleasant behavior by characters that are supposed to be protagonists because of the Joss Whedon thing. And this is exactly why you and I didn't do a Buffy podcast, Matt.
Yeah.
And it's annoying that the everyman character is the bully here.
Yeah, and it's really annoying that for years and years and years, Xander was like my favourite TV character. I still have a picture of me and Nicholas Brendan on my wall in the hallway, which at the moment is still up. The same day that I had that photo taken, I had my photo taken with Alison Mack. So, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. On the one hand, I can see, I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a dickish thing to do, but then again, I do see the logic behind him taking him, because then because Morgan's on his own, doesn't have the puppet, then like Buffy can theoretically speak to Morgan. But then again, I do think that like Giles and Willow do mention about like the ethics of nicking Sid anyway. It's very, very brief, but I don't think it's not fully ignored. I think it's not particularly like kind of called out. It's just like very subtly done by Giles and Willow.
I'm kind of amazed in that world that none of them, even Giles, at once entertained the idea that Sid might be possessed by a demon. Surely in this world, weird shit like that has happened before.
The thing is that, I mean, that like they've probably not just come across it or something that's not happened that often, because I think there is stuff that Willow finds later on and in the library when she's helping Giles research, that there are actually people that have moved essences or souls into inanimate objects. Again, what I realise as well, as I'm approaching the same age as Giles myself, I still know fuck all about anything. So I can guarantee there's probably a load of lapses in Giles' own experience. So he might be quite knowledgeable about stuff in general, but there's probably specific experiences that he's not aware. So I think my kind of sympathy for Giles perhaps not being aware of that has increased as I've gotten older.
Well, depending on how the show timeline works, last episode, last week, they did fight a demon that was stuck in a computer.
Oh, that was a bad episode.
Fair enough.
That is one of my favourite of season 1. I love that one.
So that's one of the ones that's kind of really dated and kind of...
I love it because of that.
Like, but there's still a lot of kind of fun stuff. I mean, I think it's Giles says that, Giles, it should be smelly speech is hilarious. And again, not being filler and throw away, it's the first episode with Jenny Calendar in it.
Yeah, very casually introduced in that episode.
Calendar. Don't. My trauma from my 20s, Matt. What we're talking about Giles, though. Oh, I mean, I remember kind of gently fancying him 20 years ago. Now I'm a similar age to the age Anthony Head was when he did this. He is distractively sexy. Oh, my fuck. He's just hot. I love nerds, and he's so nerdy. And men in tweed clearly are my thing. Now I'm in my mid-40s. Oh, he's fit.
How old is Giles supposed to be, actually? I can't...
Probably about my age, which is incredibly annoying. I'm the same age as old people. When did that happen?
Yeah, I bet the reality is Anthony Head was not that old.
Okay, so the Buffy wiki puts his date of birth in about 1954.
Okay, so 97 minus 54.
43.
Fuck, he's younger than me!
Yeah, that sounds right, yeah. 43.
Oh, no! I'm older than Giles in Series 1 of Buffy. Fuck my life.
Have you read any of the canon comics post?
I read Series 8. It was okay.
Angel and Faith in season 10.
Yeah, Giles comes back in a big way.
Yeah.
So I think this is actually worth talking about. We're talking about how the comics go crazy further beyond what we'd seen in the telly show. But in my brain, I think peak Buffy was like Series 5, Series 6. And so in my head, that's what the Buffy cast's main or how I see the Buffy cast around series 5, series 6. And it was really, really nice to go back and watch series 1 and see pre-out Willow and incredibly shallow Cordelia before she went through all the trauma that made her one of the most interesting characters in Angel. And it just felt like almost like a palate cleanse to go back and watch series 1 of Buffy.
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's very interesting anyway. So like when people kind of argue about whether there's character development in Buffy, it's one of these key kind of selling points, I think, as a show. But yeah, it's kind of nice just to see them in those kind of roles and stuff. And particularly, I think where you've got Xander as the everyman character and Willow is just at the moment kind of the secondary kind of exposition tool rather than what she becomes.
Adorable nerd.
Yeah.
And it's a nice start, but her journey to what she becomes at the end of series 6 is fantastic. But adorable nerd is adorable for adorable sake at this point, and I like that.
There's a couple of interesting things, particularly in retrospective looking back. There's a couple of very interesting things that are completely coincidental, I think. There's a slight discussion about when they think that the killer's human. And I think the only first time that ever gets across is actually when it's Faith in season 3 about a human that kills another human. I can't remember what it was, but there's just there's a line from Willow about killing someone or being human stuff, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's completely unintentional. But you could argue that's foreshadowing, but it's not.
Well, even before Faith, I thought of the episode Ted. A big part of that episode is Buffy thinking she's killed someone.
Yeah.
It gets undone by the twist, but there's a solid moment where Buffy is really reeling from the fact that she may have killed someone.
I'm not a fan of Ted as an episode, actually, thinking about it, but yeah, even despite like John Ritter playing against type. But I'm not much a fan of that one. But also, there's another one where there's Snyder, who part of me kind of just wants to rewatch it just because I know I'm going to enjoy Snyder a lot more. Where he goes, oh yeah, Principal Flutie might have gone for that liberal touchy-feely crap. Touchy-feely crap. But that's the liberal, the woolly liberal-headed thinking that leads to getting eaten. I mean, yeah, he's not going to be the last principal of that school to be eaten by a demon, mate.
It's wonderful. And I think Schneider is deliciously malevolent. And there's always that undertone about how much he knows. And they seed it immediately on his introduction as well. You know, getting eaten. I love the fact that they don't know if he knows she's the Slayer or not. And they never answer that before he gets killed. And that's fucking great. Yeah. I think that, you know, you do have elements of your life that you're like, how much does this person know? And you never find out.
I mean, years and years ago, I used to be part of a writing community, which is where I met We Made This founder, Tony Black, through like kind of fan fiction, kind of like writing fan fiction scripts and stuff. And okay, it's only been kind of like the last 5 or 6 years, and I've never done it for ages, but part of me is thinking, you know what? I would love someone to kind of think of a Buffy reboot, but call it Snyder. And have Snyder be the main character, having to deal with troublesome youths who he thinks are kind of responsible for the deaths of all these kids in this new place of work and stuff. But
brilliant. That would be brilliant.
Yeah. The final kind of interesting foreshadowing as well is, again, completely unintentional. Completely unintentional is that the character of Morgan is actually suffering from a brain tumour. And there's a line from Buffy going, ooh, like, particularly after, because like she finds Morgan's brain and kind of shivers once she learns that the brain had a brain tumor. And it's like, ooh, and the brain tumor is what kills her mum.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, unintentional foreshadowing, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's very kind of like weirdly close to it.
That episode is one of the greatest television episodes of all time. It kind of comes out of nowhere and it breaks the format, and it is brutal, but it's just remarkable television. I bloody love Buffy. There's some horrible shit in Buffy, some terrible, terrible storylines, but sometimes Buffy is in remarkable television. And I, you know, whilst it wasn't one of the most deep episodes, I really like this episode. I always really liked this episode. And I think it's great fun and well worth a watch.
I think it's still entertaining, and it's one that, I mean, it's not one that is probably high on my list of episodes to watch. It's probably going to end, I think, it's probably going to end up in the lower half or the lower quarter, purely on the basis of the strength of other episodes. But, I mean, there are kind of really crap episodes, or episodes I kind of dislike for a multitude of reasons. And that I would probably rank lower than this one, like top of my head, Bad Eggs, for example, in season 2, all the way in season 6, him in season 7.
A lot of season 7 ain't great.
I think so, yeah. I think I'm still slightly bitter that they just couldn't just get Eric Balfour back and finally answer the will they ever reference Jesse again, but question. That was the closest they'd ever gotten to almost bringing Jesse back.
They really should have done. That would have been a really fun, deep cut.
I think Eric Balfour had like scheduling conflicts, and he just because they tried, because there was a whole thing where it was Nicholas Brendan would have been Xander would have had his own kind of storyline talking to the First as Jesse, and
right,
yeah, that's one of the things. And one of the things I never spoke to you about that I had planned for aforementioned Buffy rewatch podcast that never happened was every episode that I would have been on, I would have gone, now where could we have referenced Jesse?
Wow. I know you liked the Jesse character, but fucking hell, that.
To be fair, it's not that. It's just the fact that he's never brought up ever again.
It is cruel.
That's what annoys me about it.
They should have been more traumatized than they were by the death of their friend in the very first episode. Or was it the second episode?
The second, because it's after the mausoleum. Because it's after the mausoleum, because that's when they escape, and then they escape, but then Jesse's not with them. And he goes, boy, you've been upgraded to bait. Sorry, we have quadruple dwarf on Shipwrecked and Comatose. There is a lot in the first 2 seasons of Buffy, which is quadruple Buffy, that I can probably remember verbatim.
Oh, mate, the way I talk as a grown man is literally completely influenced by Buffy and Red Dwarf. Half of my phraseology comes from Red Dwarf, half of my phraseology comes from Buffy. And every time I say these things, unironically, I'm like, Christ, you're 45 years old. And it's been donkey's years since I started watching either of these programs, but my phraseology is completely and utterly influenced to the point of it being kind of funny by just those 2 programs. Even Chucky and Child's Play, I don't quote that. As much as I love it, I don't quote that. That hasn't formulated the way I speak. Buffy and Red Dwarf, man, you wouldn't understand me without it.
Again, this is not this episode, but it's from the first episode. The amount of times where someone says something vaguely around, I can't remember the last time that happened, or when did that happen, my mind immediately goes to 1833, Madrid. She caught me sleeping. which is Brian Thompson, where he goes like, I fought a Slayer. Do you have proof? Only that she fought me and still lives. I can't remember the last time that happened. 1833, Madrid. She caught me sleeping.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is quite a deep cut. Shall we actually talk about the comparisons between Sid and Chucky? Because I have made some notes on that. The camera angle at the very, very start, the cold open, that really did feel very Chucky-like, the way he was running around. I liked that. And I think it was probably quite heavily influenced by Chucky. What do you think, Dev?
Yeah, there were scenes from a point of view. But then I only watched this yesterday, but I'm trying to remember at the very start, the point of view you're talking about. Does it not do the point of view of the filter and everything of the people on the stage training? And then it goes up to Morgan and Sid?
But I think it's supposed to be Mark, I think. But then again, I can't remember. I'm just thinking about it now. Do you actually see
But it was
Mark?
quite low, so it did remind me of Child's Play. Was he on his hands and knees or something?
Yeah, that's the other thing. You don't see him on his hands and knees, ever. And also, if it's the POV from someone else, then surely that gives away that it's not Sid, if Sid is on camera.
True.
But then that can't be a literal POV.
But you hear the internal thoughts of the person saying, like either brains or heart or something, and
I will be flesh is the line, which is, again, a strong parallel to Child's Play, where the whole motivation of Chucky is to get out of the doll and back into someone else's body and be flesh. So again, strong Child's Play homage here, I think.
Another arbitrary red herring, though. I mean, he's a lizard man. that's still flesh.
Oh, shit. Fucking hell. We are deconstructing this quite horribly. I like this episode. Stop it.
In the Watcher's Guide Volume 1, which I have, there's a section on the puppet show and saying Sid is just one of a long line of terrifying puppets and talking dolls in film and television. From Talking Tina in a classic episode of The Twilight Zone.
We're going to look at that.
To the horrifying dummy in William Goldman's Magic.
We've done that. Doesn't mention Chucky, though.
I would say this is probably loosely, but most inspired by Chucky, because the way Sid talks is quite like Chucky. You know, they are both sort of rough talking adult perverts.
Yeah, true. But also, I would suggest Fats in Magic is quite similar to...
Oh, yeah, there probably would be a direct reference if the writer said, yeah.
But you obviously don't see the POV of the camera in Magic. Neither do you have any kind of issues with people not believing you when you say the dummy's alive in Magic, which that is directly from Child's Play. So, you know, no one believes that the dummy is alive. And Morgan's real fear is tangible. And that, as much as Morgan is older than Andy is in Child's Play, I do think that is quite clearly influenced by Child's Play.
I've also got the Monster book, which is basically about all the different things that happen in the show. I'm trying to see if there's anything on Sid in this.
Sid probably doesn't count as a monster, does he?
Not technically, no. I guess he is just a human soul in a puppet. By the way, this is... I remembered it earlier, and it's never going to come up anywhere else. Two people that did want to bring back Sid were the writers of this episode because they wrote that Chaos Bleeds game.
Oh, there you go.
Dean Patali and Rob Des Hotel. Rob Des Hotel, who sadly passed away in 2018 due to a suspected heart attack. I think he was kind of like a long-term writing partner with Dean Patali.
Yeah, I saw that. They wrote like about a dozen episodes together.
For this, there was like story editors for the first 2 seasons, but they had both written Never Kill a Boy in the First Date, this one, Dark Age, Phases, and Killed by Death. And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, there are kind of weird, similar tonal parallels between them. Yeah, this is the one that I think they kind of get a lot better with kind of keying in a kind of theme for the episode, which they never really did with this one. And interesting enough, the director of this episode, Ellen S. Pressman, only directed another...
Oh, I saw this one.
Yeah, only directed another episode of the show in season 2. Do you have any idea which episode that is, Mark?
I'm probably not going to like the episode you said.
So if you're going to guess, based on this episode, what season 4 episode or episodes do you suspect she may have directed? Because I think there is a kind of very weird, almost similar directional vibe between the 2 episodes. So as soon
Oh, yeah, there is, yeah.
Season 2 or season 4?
Season 2.
Season 2.
So as soon as I saw that the only other episode she directed was that one, I was like, oh yeah, there's a very weird kind of... It's competent enough, but I can kind of tell why she never came back to do episodes after the episodes she directed in season 2.
I'm drawing a blank here.
I mean, it's probably not at the forefront of your mind when thinking about Buffy.
Or thinking about season 2 episodes of Buffy.
So Becoming, it's not that.
No.
I think Goofy Monster of the Week ones.
I mean, is it as obvious as Bad Eggs, which you mentioned earlier that you don't like?
No, it's not that one.
Okay, full disclosure, I've got the episode's titles up in front of me now. Oh, Christ, was it Inca Mummy Girl?
Yes.
No! Terrible.
Yeah, it's that one.
No, Inca Mummy Girl, no.
As you're insinuating, though, Matt, very similar in terms of the monster, the mummy, but they're not actually the bad guy.
Yeah, it's a similar plot twist, actually.
I think even if you can give this episode criticisms as well as... Well, Inca Mummy Girl's probably got a bit more criticism towards it because I don't think it's a very good episode. Well, the twist being that the episode itself isn't... She's not an all-out-and-out villain. She's more of a case of morally grey. I need to do stuff to survive, but I don't care what I do to survive, but it conflicts with the moral standing of our protagonists.
It's a tragic backstory with moral implications, which, whilst not as heavy, Sid has a very tragic backstory. but he's a pervy old man. So there's a, it's about grey. You're absolutely right. Both episodes are about greyness.
But I think the pervy old man, I think he's all talk and no action when it comes to that. I think he's just...
Well, he hasn't got a dick, has he?
I just personally think he'll just like talk, and I think he'll talk rather than do anything or act upon it. I think he'll just be leery and just be that drunken bloke in the pub that will just make those comments rather than actually physically.
Yeah.
I also think that Sid potentially is just a character that, when it comes down to it, will probably pick saving the world over getting his end away. Whereas I think if you got the economical character who literally has to drain the life of people to survive and doesn't seem to want to be able to find a way of getting around that, I think the pervy dummy is perhaps morally the more upstanding.
Oh yeah.
I think we've talked about this, his characteristics in scenes as they come, but I do think a decent detail in writing is in that scene when he reveals that by breaking the spell, he's not coming back. He presumably accepted his death years ago and has been wanting to die. So I think that sets up that retroactively goes back and sets up a very sympathetic angle to all of his perviness. That it is because he doesn't expect to actually get any action because he's wanting to die.
Yeah,
it's actually very tragic. But the more you think about it, the more tragic it becomes. And you can almost argue that he's so anti everything in the world and bitter about what was done to him that there is very little left other than the desire to die. So maybe he's got the right to be a cantankerous, pervy old shitbag.
But I also think that he's, as a demon hunter as well, I think and going back to my kind of idea that with a slightly revised draft, is that he's got his own calling. Then again, no, I mean, this is a whole different conversation for a Buffy podcast that'll never happen, but whether he actually actively he made the choice to be a demon hunter rather than told he had to be, whereas Buffy really has no choice.
Yes.
Into being who she is, and what part of her arc throughout at least the first 4 or 5 years is her kind of proactively seeing that she has this role and does it, whereas Sid has been doing this thing for years and years, actively chose to become a demon hunter and is actively knowing that he has his kind of peace once he completes his reward. So instead of just going around trying to find a way to become human again, which possibly could happen, this is the Buffy world, so he probably could find a way of getting himself out of the body the usual way, the villain way of just killing people and harvesting their organs so that the dummy becomes human again. He actively is not doing that. He is finishing the work he started in stopping the 7 of these kind of demon brothers from killing any more people.
I think it subtly and quite early on gives you a power level of what some of these demons potentially have that Buffy will be facing in future. She will face some incredibly powerful demons with insurmountable odd level of power. And that's what Sid's been fighting for such a long time. And that's why he's so old and jaded and grumpy and etc. And that's, again, the more I look at this, again, I guess I've never watched Buffy with a kind of analytical eye. I've just enjoyed it for what it is. We would have done great on a Buffy podcast, but we're still not fucking doing it.
I would say definitely similar to that point in terms of either subtle or underutilized. When you're talking about his past, I see it as very similar to a parallel that they didn't make in the episode, but a parallel to him and that Slayer from the 30s, that he was maybe a Xander or a Willow who was friends with that Slayer, just a normal person. And then because they fell in love, he joined that world and became, a monster hunter. But he was just a human.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of deepness in this episode that you don't spot initially because it's like, oh, dummy, twist, 45 minutes, done.
Well, that's the other thing I wanted to get into as well, in terms of we've been talking so much about Sid, developing him as a character from halfway into the episode. The character of Morgan disappears once he dies. What exactly did you think he was getting out of this? Because it's never really explored what his relationship with Sid is.
True.
really his brain tumor is only because of the twist that the killer needs a good brain. But other than that, it doesn't seem to connect with Sid in any way. Like, and the way it's set up in terms of the red herring, it seems like Morgan doesn't want to be a part of this, or maybe does, but he's nervous. Like, yeah, you really have no idea why Morgan is doing any of this.
They don't go into his motivation at all, you're right.
And they don't even really say, because he is a character for this episode, and it's conveniently set around the talent show. Did he just meet Sid? Has he had Sid for a while? It's unclear.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah. I never actually thought about that.
Yeah, he's peripheral.
And then as soon as, like, he's gone. He's not really mentioned apart.
Yeah, it's kind of awkward that in a moment of good direction, I do think the quote-unquote death of Sid, well, his release, I think that's a really touching moment, how quiet it is, everyone's just taking in the moment. But then, Morgan, the actual human person, he dies, like, off camera, and then that's it, he's gone. Just another student for season 1 to kill.
And Sid doesn't mourn him either.
No,
so what was their relationship? Huh.
I think Sid kind of, like, dismisses Morgan, I think. I can't remember if it's after they discover he's dead where he goes like, I should have gone with you guys rather than the kid. I'm like, so why the flipping hell? What about Morgan did Sid find? Yeah, this is my sidekick. Yeah, I never thought about that.
Also, a dick move, since after the twist we learned that Sid was a human. It is like, shouldn't he have any sympathy towards this other human?
Yeah, good point. So I think this is a flawed episode. There are some great elements to it. I think the Sid character was a really cool concept with a fascinating backstory and something that could have definitely been explored much more deeply. There are some weak elements of the plot, but I do think it was a genuinely good mystery. Was it Morgan? Was it Schneider? Was it Sid? Was it someone else you're not thinking about? Fucking hell, was it Cordy? Whatever. I still think I really like this episode. It might just be because there's a fucking doll in it, but I really like this episode. I would have liked to have seen more Sid and the introduction of Schneider, who is a favourite character of mine. Yeah, I think it's quite high up on my list of Series 1 episodes for sure.
Yeah, I enjoy it as well. I think we've mentioned the word filler episode. I think you could, if you wanted to, you could skip this episode. I mean, like the introduction of Snyder, he'll be in the next episode and you'll get who he is almost immediately. So I don't think there's anything pivotal you need to know in this episode. But for all the faults of it being an average episode, it's still early Buffy and it's still Buffy. So it's a fun episode.
I'm running through the season in my head. As you said that, I still think this is probably in my lower third of the season in comparison to other episodes. I think perhaps Teacher's Pet is probably the weakest for me. Yeah, so this technically could be 11th, actually, thinking about it.
I don't see it. I think this is a fun episode.
I mean, as Buffy as a whole, there are always moments, lines, kind of little character moments in every single episode, even the really bloody awful ones, like Beer Bad, where...
Oh.
Yeah. Buffy and its relationship to alcohol is a whole different story. There are at least a couple of moments that even the kind of average ones will always have a moment which are like, oh, that's slightly higher in my favourite moments, like Dead Man's Party in season 3. Average episode, but kind of pivotal to kind of get the balance of the characters after season 2-3 break. Has that goes, look at my mask, isn't it pretty? It raises the dead Americans, which is still one of my favourite Charles lines. This one still has that as well. I mean, there are moments in this that they're still stick in my head, but I think in comparison to moments or things that I like more in season 1, it's quite low down. It's a bit of a shame because again Snyder's great, and it's a shame that his first episode's that low down for me. But I think in comparison to what I feel about other episodes in season 1, it's near the bottom. It's also the only ever episode of the show which has a not post credits, but I don't know what the terminology is, but during credit sequence. It's the only thing. It's the only episode that has that when you actually see their acting.
Yes.
In terms of wanting to watch this episode, if you like the Scooby comedy stuff, this is a really good episode from season 1 for that. There's a lot of funny moments in this. Like just right at the start, Cordelia butchering Whitney Houston is so funny.
Actually, to be fair, on his credit, I think that is probably the closest this episode has to its usual spinning of teenage tropes. So if you're thinking of, I don't know, like the Peter Engel stuff, like Saved by the Bell, USA High, what's it called, California Dreams or whatever it's called, those kind of shows where you've got the popular kind of lead, kind of Cordelia-like character who suddenly is also able to sing when they have their talent show stuff. So they've got all the characters that are able to do their talent stuff. So I'm pretty sure there's an episode of Saved by the Bell and Saved by the Bell the New Class where Zach Morris somehow manages to form opera or something stupid like that, or at least pretend or fake
Wow.
or anything like that. But I quite like the fact that they didn't go the trope of having Cordelia also be a good singer, which I think is a very kind of nice trope on that.
It was something that Buffy did well, was actually give characters flaws. And protagonists and antagonists all had strengths and flaws. And that was always something that was really well done in Buffy. And I think maybe watching Buffy influenced how I like to play RPGs. I don't want to play a perfect character. I want to play a character with flaws. And I've always found that more fun as an RPG character.
I think my favourite kind of character is two good, overly good ones, like where their kind of optimism is pretty much a flaw in itself, like Leslie Knope or Sam Beckett from Quantum Leap. Like, forgive the D&D. Is it lawful good? Is that the right term?
Yeah.
Lawful good is lawful great.
So is that like Sam Beckett, Leslie Knope kind of?
Lawful means you follow a strict set of rules, not necessarily laws, and good means you are fundamentally good.
Yeah, it's very old track, like TNG.
Yeah,
for the most part.
Okay, so you could argue Buffy's lawful good
for a while, yeah. But that's what's good about the show. That's what's so revolutionary about Buffy in TV, in that it was a teenager show that gets very dark and gets very real.
But then
it wears down the characters.
So those characters could move around those alignment charts type thing. So, you've got Wesley Wyndham-Pryce from Angel that just goes from. You haven't seen Angel yet, Devon, but you need to get on it because
I know quite a bit about it.
Well, Wesley's definitely lawful good to the point of being uselessly so.
but then, like, does that change? That change?
Yes,
Angel definitely,
very much so.
Yeah.
He becomes almost, I would say, pure neutral. Well, maybe not. He's still probably lawful thinking about it because even though his code of honor changes, he follows his own very strict rules. So again, like I say, lawful doesn't necessarily mean you follow the law of the land, but you follow a very strict code that you don't breach. So he would definitely become lawful neutral or even lawful evil with some of the stuff that he does.
Okay. I think while I was talking about Buffy as a whole, I'm going to say that Wesley's my favourite arc throughout the whole universe, actually.
Sublime.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about people that stay within the D&D circle, Harmony just stays Harmony throughout the entire Buffyverse.
Chaotic evil for the whole fucking time. Yes, you're right. Harmony is definitely not harmonious. Is there anything else that we want to talk about? Specifically the puppet show rather than marking out about Buffy.
Yeah. I quite like the fact that they bring Giles out of his comfort zone.
He has to do actual schoolwork.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's quite a nice thing where he says, like, where the new boss has said that he wants him to kind of interact with the student body more. And he goes, I did try to explain that my vocation was to limit that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then again, though, saying that, one of the things that I know since I've worked in education is that one of the things that I know that's going to ruin a rewatch for me is that I'm going to be rewatching Buffy, and the amount of fucking safeguarding concerns I would have to raise with Giles. I mean, yeah, like I've been overly familiar with students, and my God, he's a walking, talking safeguarding concern, even thinking about it.
That's one of those on the nose things where they sort of reference that by like season 2 or season 3, where they say that no one goes into the library. Yeah. So it's never a problem.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, his over familiarity with those kind of 3 students is
yeah, it's just 3 people that he knows so well.
Yeah,
it's generally quite concerning when I think about it on a safeguarding level.
Oh dear. Well, Matt, I knew I'd enjoy this because the Buffy podcast was something we always intended to do, but It's not happening. And the reason is Joss Whedon's a bastard. But this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and whatever the fuck Twitter's called nowadays.
Twitter. It's still called Twitter.
Even if I just don't deactivate it because it's driving me up the wall at the moment. Basically, if you search for Pick a Disc, which is the podcast where I talk about music, whatever's most likely it's going to be me on Flash, on Threads, Instagram, whatever. You can also then find me on a show that you might have heard of called Shipwrecked Comatose, which is a Red Dwarf podcast hosted by Mark.
That's me.
And our friend Kurt, with a few other friends of ours, Carl and Colin. And also, I've also currently working on a second season of another podcast called Ask Us About Loom, where I talk about interactive fiction, adventure games, and kind of narrative-led choose your own adventure / those kind of like unique type games where like choose your own adventure but in digital form or point-and-click adventures and stuff. So that's Ask Us About Loom as well. So season 2, that should be coming up later in the last third of this year.
Dev, where can people find you on the internet?
People can find me at Twitter, at Absolute Travesty. I'm not many other places. That's it.
Right, good. And if you're looking for me, you can find me at Mark Adams HC on Instagram and Twitter. If you are interested in wrestling, it's Mark Adams Announcer on Facebook. If you're interested in my work as a humanist celebrant, it is Mark Adams Humanist Celebrant on Facebook. I kind of do other podcasts as well. I've been guesting on a lot recently, but the other one I do regularly was mentioned by Matt at Red Dwarf Pod on Twitter. So until next time, until next week, wanna play?
I don't get it. Is it avant-garde?
Yes, Dev.
ChuckyVision is a podcast brought to you by the We Made This Network. Follow us on Twitter at ChuckyVision. Follow the network on Twitter at WMT_network. Our website is WeMadeThisNetwork.com. The logo was designed by Dev, and the theme tune composed by Dark Fantasy Studios. Wanna play?
Do you like pop culture and top 10 lists? If you do, then step inside the Den of 10. In the Den, we have countless top 10 lists to captivate and titillate even the weariest soul. We've got lists of films.
And there's that famous thing about the scene where he improvised his way through smashing his hand and cutting his hand open on the glass as he banged his hand on the table.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really say boo to that.
Music.
The rest of the song is like just a swirling crescendo of clever songwriting, amazing singing, great drumming, like beautiful guitar effects.
Video games.
And I think that's exactly what happened with Zelda. It was everything, looking back, is on a much lower resolution to what we see in Breath of the Wild. But as I was playing it, I just felt like my imagination was just going absolutely wild.
TV. You know, this is where a sitcom verges on the cinematic, still in a neat 20 minutes. And the interaction between these vastly different characters is so well realised. And more. Listen to us on all major podcast providers. Find us on Twitter at Den of 10Pod, where you can like, follow, comment, and vote. Or find us on the We Made This Podcast Network at WeMadeThisNetwork.com. We hope to see you soon in the Den of 10.
What do you both think? Should we do a 3-episode series?
Yeah, I'm up for it. I've got to watch that episode. I haven't seen it yet, but I'll watch the episode, yeah. I've seen the scene. I do know what you're talking about. I've seen the scene of Spike and Puppet Angel fighting.
He's a bloody puppet.
Yeah, so if we make October a 3-part series rather than a 2-part series, it just makes sense that we've had you on for this and then kind of organically realised, oh yeah, another puppet.
Yeah.
Should we do it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network.